family physician at Creighton, and kind of got to what I'm doing now, and it's sort of an odd and unusual journey. As a little kid, I thought I'm sort of a drama queen, and I always wanted to do something that involved having deep and important meaning with human lives. And as a kid, I thought I'd either be a mortician or a doctor or a counselor or a priest. Those were sort of the choices in childhood. And one after another, the other things I grew disillusioned with. And was an undergrad at UNL and took the medical school entrance exams, the MCAT, sort of on a lark, and did very well, and was accepted into UNMC and went to medical school and finished all that in 1985 and went to Chicago to do a family medicine residency, and then moved to California and lived in San Francisco and worked in Walnut Creek, California for a couple of years. And does anybody know Walnut Creek, California? Have you ever been out there in the East Bay part of San Francisco? It's an extraordinary part in the world. You know, there's probably no better weather than anywhere on the planet, and it's a very privileged place in the world. You know, it's multi-million-dollar homes, and people keep horses and drive nice cars. And over a course of several weeks, I realized, my God, this is just not what I want to do. This just isn't doing it for me. And so my friend June, who's a nurse, and I went overseas. We left and went to the Sudan for a year and worked in the refugee camps with the Eritreans and Ethiopians. And there were Taya, our friend who lives in Victoria in Canada, and June and I ran 3 hospitals and a feeding station for newborns and a home nurse agency and a midwife training school. And we got some money from the UN High Commission on Refugees, and the organization we worked with brought over ophthalmologists from Switzerland to do eye surgery in the desert because people have extraordinary high rates of blindness from an infection in their eyes called trachoma, and then the UV radiation causing early cataracts. And people would come from Libya and Egypt and all across North Africa to these eye clinics. And we were first on the scene at the close of the Eritrean and Ethiopian Civil War the first time around. Do you guys know this place in the world? Up in the northeast part of Africa, Eritrea was an Italian colony, and it declared independence from the rest of Ethiopia. Ethiopia hated this bitterly because by losing Eritrea, Ethiopia lost the outlet to the sea, and Ethiopia now becomes landlocked. And so they fought and fought and fought. And finally, the Eritreans won, and they just threw all the rest of the Ethiopian soldiers across the border into the Sudan, and like 50,000 people a day were coming across the border, and it's 118 degrees, and they don't have any water or food. And we swooped in and set up feeding stations and watering stations and medical triage, and it was just an amazing time in my life, and we were just high on all this drama and doing all this cool stuff. And so that was sort of done, and then I was heading back to California, and I got a major guilt attack because I had borrowed money from the state of Nebraska to go to school, and part of the deal was I was supposed to come back here and work in a physician shortage area to help repay my student loans, and I finally decided I really needed to tend to that. So I took a left turn on the way back to San Francisco and got hooked up back in Omaha and worked at the Charles Drew Health Center in North Omaha for a couple of years, and then was offered a teaching position at Creighton, and so that's how I got back here again. I have very loudly burned my bridges at least 3 times as a grown-up leaving Omaha, and had 3 times had to sort of sneak back in the middle of the night. So it's very humbling. All of you who think that you're getting out of here, just beware. You know, don't sell all your stuff too fast because you may end up coming back. So now I'm doing family medicine at Creighton, and that's got a whole host of challenges on its own. We have a wonderful and amazing office down in the Old Market, and it's diverse and fascinating, and there are gay people and straight people, and you know, the second richest guy in Omaha sits in the waiting room with the guy who lives under the viaduct, and black and white and Sudanese and Mexican and everybody in between, and somehow we manage most of the time with grace to sort of make this work. There's lots of human mess-ups, but mostly it works. I understand that you've been spoken to already and had the opportunity to visit with people who are chiropractors and naturopaths. Do you know what MDs, what branch of medicine that is? Does anybody know the answer to that? What is a medical doctor? What profession is that really? It's not a chiropractor and it's not a naturopath. I'm sorry, ma'am?
Allopathic.
The answer was an allopath. Very good. Medical doctors in the United States are, as a rule, allopaths, although not all. There's one other possibility that sometimes people are called doctor, and they're sort of Western medicine trained, but they're not necessarily allopaths. Do you guys know what the other option would be? The closest school is in Des Moines. I'm going to come to that too in a minute. The question raised was, what's an allopath? And we're going to come to that in a minute too. The closest school is in Des Moines for the other possibility. Is that a good enough clue? That doesn't help much, huh? Sometimes an osteopath is also regarded as a Western medical doctor in this country, also called a DO. So an MD or a DO are generally the two people that folks can address in the sort of Western idea of what medicine is. So the question raised was, what's an allopath? Anybody got ideas about that? What's an allopath? That's a strange word. And in fact, people don't hear that very much. You guys know what a homeopath is? Okay. A homeopath treats illness with the introduction of small amounts of the offending agent. If you are ill with, what would be an example? I guess the best example is allergies. If you are ill with a reaction to ragweed, what a homeopath does is actually gives you little dibbits of ragweed, tiny, tiny little amounts, and gradually works up the amount so your immune system stops regarding it as foreign and thereby achieves treatment. That's what a homeopath does. So the Latin roots are treat with like substances, or treat like with like. An allopath treats opposite or anti-to. An allopath treats with the opposite of a substance. If you are allergic to a bacteria, an allopath gives you an antibacteria. If you're ill with a virus, you are given an antiviral. If you are ill with inflammation, you are giving an anti-inflammatory. So an allopath treats opposite to or against, and that's where the word comes from. So basically what I spend my whole day doing is going opposite to the flow. I sort of am oppositional to, and that's what allopaths do. Have any of you guys ever picked up a PDR, the Physician's Desk Reference? Yes. Does that ring a bell? And you go through the PDR, and the thing is divided into big chapters. And the first chapter is antibacterials, and then is anti-catarrhals, and then is anti-diarrhea, and then is anti-epilepsy, and then is just march down the thing. The whole book is, the compendium of all the antis, and that's sort of what I do. How did allopaths get to be in the position of, this is changing gratefully, but how did allopaths get to be the sort of the big dogs in this heap, at least for a while? Okay, the answer raised over here was pharmaceuticals, and that's probably a biggest part of it. There were a couple of major discoveries that really began in the 1850s and 40s, and then another big jump in the 1920s and another big jump in the 1940s. In the 1840s, people recognized for the first time scientifically the principles of infectious agents. This is a great study. If you were a little kid and you were born to your mom by a midwife in England in the 17 or 1800s, you stood about a 3-time greater chance of surviving, and your mother of surviving, than if you were born by an obstetrician in England. Do you know why? The midwives had a 3-time better survival rate than the obstetricians in England in the 1700s and 1800s. Do you know why? Ma'am?
They wash their hands?
Yeah! The midwives wash their hands. And so the whole deathbed, or the what did they call this? Birth or postpartum fever and the birthing fever. Obstetricians believed that they were above all this at the time. We don't carry infectious agents, this old hand washing thing, we're above all of that. And so as a rule, people would go from patient to patient, and you would bring Sally, Mary's stuff, and you would bring, you know, Jennifer, Sally and Mary's stuff, and you would just go down the line in the wards, and, you know, by the end of it, everybody has sort of shared everything. But the midwives had a tradition of hand washing before each delivery or before attending each woman in labor. And it was only until early 1800s that it was finally recognized that our hands generally bear infectious agents, and by hand washing, infections could be reduced. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, both on dates and scenarios, but not much. This is pretty much what happened. So that was kind of the first big discovery. In the 1920s, they isolated insulin for the first time. I believe it was from pork. I don't know, it may have been from beef, but beef or pork, they finally recognized that insulin could be the key to open up cells and allow cells to use sugar that was ingested. My grandmother died last month at the age of 93 and had a beautiful death. She just sort of slipped out and didn't want anything and wasn't in any pain and just stopped eating and just sort of drifted off. And it was a perfect Lutheran death because she didn't make any fuss, and as a rule, Lutherans don't like to make a fuss, so she was very happy. But her sister, Louise, Elaine Louise, had died in 1926 at the age of 9. And the great heartbreak to me when I marched back into that little Norwegian cemetery in Newman Grove, which is where all my people are from, is that my great aunt Louise died within months of the discovery of insulin, which would have saved her life because she was an insulin-dependent diabetic at the time. So I see that little headstone with the 9-year-old and I think about her and I think, you know, but for the luck or the bad luck of timing. So that was sort of the next big thing. And then sulfa drugs and penicillin in the late 30s and early 40s. Think about what that would have meant though. If you were a parent, have you seen this painting of, and I regret I can't recall the title of the painting. The physician is sitting on the bedside and the little girl is all swaddled and it looks like it's in a cottage. And the little girl is painted to have a fever, and she's very, very ill. And the physician is at the side of the bed, sitting on the bed, probably checking her pulse and holding her hand like that. And the physician is sort of keeping watch while this child is sick. That's sort of what physicians could do before antibiotics. And think about it if you were a parent and you had a little kid who had a temp of 104 and probable, you know, tonsillitis or strep throat or some horrible infection. And you realize that there was almost nothing to be done. And many of the treatments at the time were actually probably contributing to the illness. You know, the things they could do like bloodletting or immersion or ingestion of agents that would make you throw up probably contributed to the mortality at the time. And to realize for the first time that odds are your child was going to make it, you know, was going to survive these illnesses. And it was primarily because of the discovery first of sulfa and then of penicillin, you know, from simple bread mold. Have any of you guys ever marched back through a cemetery, one of our pioneer cemeteries in Nebraska or Iowa? If you walk back through an old cemetery, what do you see? Lots of infants. Probably in most of the, especially if you go to the back of the cemetery and go to the old stones, probably 3/4 of the graves are little kids. And just think about what time would have been then. I mean, children, and I don't mean to use this word facetiously, but children, they weren't likely to hang on to them. A lot of kids didn't make it through all that. And for the first time now, we have a change, you know, that there's going to be something that's going to help these kids survive. And then sort of on the heels of that comes contraception. You know, another allopathic thing, another anti-conception. Now that children are going to make it to adulthood with a higher likelihood, we've got to sort of figure out something to do, a little limit of family size perhaps. And I won't get into the politics or religious backgrounds of any of this because it was very, very heated at the time. This would have been late 60s when birth control pills were first allowed to be legal. And when they were originally licensed, they were only licensed for which people, by the way? Married women. Only married women could get birth control pills when they were first released. My friend Rick lives in Anthon, Iowa, or he's from Anthon, Iowa, which is a town. Has anybody ever heard of this place, Anthon, up by Sioux City? It's a little town of 500 people. And up at the top of the hill above the town is this enormous house. It looks like Terra, 10,000 square foot house with great big pillars, and it lords over the whole town, right at the top of Main Street. It's just got this perfect commanding view of the whole town. This is a little old farmer who lives in that house, and he invested in 1963 in the company that made birth control pills, unbeknownst to all the other little farmers in Anthon. And when this thing finally got FDA approval, he came down with the big bucks, and the first thing he did was make this enormous house to lord over the entire town, because nobody much cared for him at the beginning, and he was sort of and he sort of showed everybody. So that was sort of the next big thing. But this, the compilation of these things over the course of time, I think, is part of the reason why allopathic physicians got prominence at the time.
Did the AMA play a part in that?
The question raised was, did the AMA play a part in that? The American Medical Association, as I understand it, is responsible for phenomenal lobbying and probably a lot of fiddling with payer systems, with who's going to get reimbursed for doing what. And I'm sure contributed a great deal to this. Our system now, where an office visit costs $80 and an antibiotic can cost anywhere from $20 to $220, and to have your appendix out, the bill for that right now would probably be about somewhere between $15,000 and $18,000 by the time you paid the OR and the anesthesiologist and the surgeon and the nurses in the hospital and everybody. What allowed that to happen is primarily the way the insurance system is set up. If people actually had to reach into their wallet and pay me in the course of day, it'd be far, far more likely that, my office visits would be the same as yours, as a masseuse or masseur, or a chiropractic, or a homeopath, or everybody else's. You look at the way these people earn their living, and that's pretty much what mine would be if it weren't for the way the insurance system is set up. And may be again, because you guys are aware, of course, that all this is in just tremendous flux, that the way things are paid for and the way things are structured probably won't be this way much longer, at least if I were to predict, that most people recognize that this system is sort of broken and isn't working very well, and probably won't continue this way. We are arguably, the wealthiest society of people, community of people on the earth. As a society of people, the United States is arguably the wealthiest, but we're far, far, far from the top in terms of health indicators. We actually don't do a very good job in infant mortality and infant vaccination rates and childbirth mortality and even longevity. I mean, those kind of things. If you look at the indicators, there are other societies that do much, much better than we do with far less of their income. So it's probably going to change. And I don't want to be an old dog. I want to be able to learn new tricks. So we'll have to see how all of that goes. I should hush for a minute and see if there are any other thoughts or questions. Everybody doing okay? Any other burning ideas?
What do you teach at Creighton?
The question raises, what do I teach at Creighton? I work within the Department of Family Medicine, and I have a couple of areas of expertise. I love doing HIV care, and so a lot of what I do is care for people with HIV and do the teaching around that. And it's a huge high for me to bring in, one of my favorite things is a panel of my patients. I'll talk to my patients and say, you guys come on over to the auditorium on campus with me, and we're going to sit in front of the medical students for the first time and just do a question and answer session. And many of the students up here have never seen or talked to anybody who's actually living with HIV before, and it becomes very profound, and I try and stack the deck here a little bit. I've got this beautiful African-American grandmother who's 70-something years old who's living with HIV, and I have a little 12-year-old girl over here who's living with HIV, and a couple of gay guys, and I got my mix. I got all different kinds of people, and it just violates all of the assumptions that people have about this. And you watch people have their epiphanies just in the course of this hour. you know, all the stuff that people bring with them. And then you sit and listen, and usually about half the auditorium is sniffling or in tears a little bit by the time this thing is done. And it's like, yes, you know, I just love this. It's very cool. So that's one of my favorite. I also do hospice care, and I like teaching about hospice care and sort of what that means philosophically, and spend a lot of time with that. Those are probably the two things I'm most passionate about. I said I'd get to retire when I delivered a baby emergently, because I haven't delivered a baby since I left the Sudan. The last baby I delivered then was the son of a sheikh and his third wife. We say sheikh in this country, but the actual Arabic pronunciation is sheikh, which is sort of the village leader or the big dog. And he had taken a third wife. Islam allows you to take 4 if you can pay for them. He had taken a third wife who had miscarried 3 or 4 times in a row at 20 weeks. She'd gotten to 20 weeks gestation in a 40-week time frame. And at 20 weeks would cough or sneeze, and boom, the baby would fall out. 3, 4 times in a row. This is a terrible word to describe this, but what this is called an incompetent cervix. And I bet you never knew that your cervix could be incompetent. Yeah. And that's exactly what it behaves at, an incompetent cervix. If you think of a cervix like a little purse string, you know, at the bottom of a leather sack, what happens there is that she coughs or sneezes, puts a little pressure from above, and the purse string slips open, and boom, the baby falls out. So Sheikh dude is getting ready to take wife number 4, because it's like, okay, she can't give me the air, and so I'm gonna have to take a 4th wife. And I heard about this story, and I'm like, you know what? I've never done a cerclage before, which is to replace the purse string, to redo it again. But by golly, I'm going to learn. And so I marched over there with our little midwife, who could speak Arabic, and we got her up in the stirrups, and I'm sitting here reading the book, and I'm doing this for the first time, which is another thing you'd never get away with in this country, in Omaha, Nebraska. You know, I'd be like, okay. So used fishing line, in effect, you know, a 3-0 or a 2-0 suture, and used fishing line, and sewed this little knot all the way around her cervix. And by golly, when she got to 38, 39 weeks, we snuck up there and clipped the knot, and she gave birth to this beautiful little boy who they named Abdul Malik, which in Arabic means servant of the king. And they had a big party, and they drank homemade beer, and they killed all the goats, and they carried on and all this stuff. And so that was the last baby that I delivered in the Sudan until last Sunday. I was up on the peds ward at Creighton, and I heard one of the OB nurses screaming, "Get somebody in here!" And when you hear that kind of stuff from the OB ward, you know, it's like, okay, something is not going as planned. And so my resident runs off and starts scrubbing, and she goes, "No, now! Get somebody in here now!" And I walked in, put on a pair of gloves, and delivered this little baby to a Sudanese mother. Yay! Which I just thought was so cool. And then ran around the room and greeted all 14 of the aunts and uncles and everybody else in there with, you know, "Mabruk, mabruk, alhamdulillah," and go on in Arabic. And they're all like, oh, you know, "Goodman, I thought you were Jewish," you know, and I'm going on and on. And we just had this great time. And I always said I got to retire when I did that, when I did the emergency delivery. And so now I want to retire. So Paulette, you know, it's been a pleasure. I'm done. No, I don't get to retire yet, but it would be fun. So anyway, that's sort of the deal. That's the rhythms of my day. Yes, sir? Oh, I thought you were signaling me. Sir?
As a physician, what's your view on vaccinating kids? There's a lot of controversy about how it affects the liver and the immune system and things now.
Yeah, the question raised was, what's my view on vaccinating kids? And the principles of infectious illness and the principles of how we transmit things to one another, to my mind, still are in favor of vaccinating. I acknowledge that there are risks and there are problems from the preservative in vaccines sometimes, and there are reactions to the vaccination, you know, itself that are not always favorable. But on balance, it's very, very clear to me that lives are saved because of this. And again, the only real insight I have to this is my exposure to places in the world where it didn't happen. And the stuff that we never see over here, you know, because of vaccinations, we don't see lockjaw, we don't see tetanus, and we don't have polio. anymore. And when you see these things, when the little kids come into the compound and they still have polio and they still have tetanus and they still get, well, we're getting pertussis again in this country too. I don't know if you guys follow the paper, but there's a big outbreak actually of pertussis in Omaha right now. And I think of those things as preventable with vaccine. I'm still in favor for it. I respect parents' individual decision or grown-ups' decision about it, but part of the way that we educate and treat our children, you know, if our kids only stayed in one household or if they were separate a little bit from other smaller groups through their youth, I don't know if it would be as big a deal as when we have all the kids be in a big daycare together or if we're all in a big elementary school together. And, you know, odds are, if you're around a lot of other kids, eventually you're going to get exposed to this stuff. And if we can protect the kids by having everybody immunized, I am for it. I recommend it.
A severe child is one that comes down with an immune disease or reaction. It's not such a good deal.
Yeah, the statement made was if your child is the one that suffers as a result of this, of course, you know, that's not such a good deal. But on balance, for the group, for the community as a whole, most folks would agree it's still a value. And again, everybody sort of has to trust their guts on this, trust your conscience on it or what's right for you. But overall, I think the kids and we all benefit from it. Before I went overseas again, I did my hepatitis A and B shots because I decided I didn't want to get Hep A or Hep B. And Taya, this nurse friend of mine from Canada, got Hep A when we were in the Sudan, and it didn't kill her, but oh my Lord. I mean, she didn't get anything done for about 8 weeks, first of all, besides laying in the hut underneath the ceiling fan being yellow. And
How long did it take for her to start having symptoms?
the whole arc of this thing was probably about 8 weeks, you know, the whole thing. She had a lot of bad luck, though. She's also one that always had the snakes in the thatch of roof of her hut. we'd be settling down at night and it'd be dark and the Muzain had called the last call to prayer, you know, which is a really cool thing. In the little village we were in, which is called Shoak, they have a little tower and the Muzain would go up there, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. And it's just a great way to sort of end the day. And so we're all sort of snuggling and getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden you hear Taya, bah! And it would be another great big snake had fallen on her bed from the thatch in the room. So she had all the crappy luck. She always is the one that found all the scorpions too. You always had to shake your shoes out because she just drew this stuff. She was just like the, you know.
Were they cobras or what kind?
I don't know, yeah. The Arabic people that we worked with would always say, Dabib Kabir, which is big snake. You know, what kind of snake is it? Oh, Dabib Kabir, it's a big snake. And it's like, and sometimes you'd see a snake that was only like this, and you go, you know, Wakabir, not very big, and they go, oh, it's not very big, but it has a long tail. I'm like, what the hell is that all about? I never should get that. In the Sudan, by the way, there are poisonous snakes, and it was always the little kids who got bitten, and it was often the little kids who died. Does anybody know why? You won't know this, I don't think, unless you've sort of been there, but little kids, the 3-year-old and the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds' job is to march out every morning across the desert and look for things to burn. Look for twigs and wood and things to bring back for the cooking fire and fire up the coffee and get things going in the morning. That's the little kid's job. And so you can play this through in your head, the scenario, and it was always the little kids who were getting bitten by the snakes, and it was just horrible. You know, so. No, yeah, you wouldn't get our kids to do this, first of all. It's like, I'm too busy with the Game Boy. Yeah. But it's sort of an interesting concept. We were one of the places that had anti-venom and again, a beautiful allopathic thing, an anti-venom. And so people would come from a long way away when they got bitten, when they got hurt with all this. I recognize now in retrospect, by the way, that what I did in the Sudan and left there counts for almost nothing. The truth is that these are competent, intelligent, wonderful people who are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. And this is my sort of newest self-discovery. And what happened by that 2 years of being away was just tremendous for me. I'm the one that got the great big prize from all that, because I got to participate in all this and listen to all this and learn a little bit of this language and understand how these people operated, and get away from a world of cell phones and beepers and stuff for a couple of years, which is a tremendous thing, by the way, you guys, if you think it through. I mean, you know, I'm beginning to recognize one of the worst things we've created for ourselves is constant contact. I just think it's heartbreaking. So I should shush. I don't want to editorialize about that too much. But it's wonderful to be in a place where...
Because a young person doesn't know any other life.
Yeah.
As an older person, you see, we know what it was like before they came about. So a young person, 20 and under, would think, how did you exist? How did you exist?
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
I have a constant riff going.
They just have communicating. We didn't have cell phones.
You know, you're not that important.
Yeah, I mean, I remember what it was like, but...
I have a constant riff going with my little niece, Jacqueline, because she just got hers. She's 14, and of course this is just high holy days to have a cell phone when you're 14, and it's constant. You know, she's got this thing all the time, and I look over her shoulder, and she's doing this G2G, and I'm like, Jacqueline, what's this G? Got to go. And it's like, oh God, you know. I get the biggest kick out of all this because I don't even know what this is. But again, to bring back to this, what a gift it is to be in a place. And so if you guys have opportunities to do this stuff in the course of your work, and maybe it'll happen. I mean, take it on just for, personal growth. To go to other places in the world and tackle this stuff again. Certainly the Sudanese where I worked and the Ethiopians and Eritreans could run circles around anything that I could create to provide for themselves. They're extremely resourceful, tough people. But I walked away with a lot. I learned a lot. It was a great big hoot.
Do they use massage, those people?
The question was, do they use massage? And I do not think so very much, and the reason why is because I think Islam has such strong prescriptions against at least intergender stuff. A woman would never, ever, ever be able to do this with a man, or a man to a woman, unless they were married. The women do a great job of looking after one another and are very tender with one another, sort of in private places, though, and out of sight of the rest of the community. The women henna each other's feet and hands. And did you guys know about henna, the sort of washable tattoo stuff? And they have these incredible designs that start at the feet and go up the legs and up the hands and the arms and stuff. And they anoint one another, and they use incense and look after one another very, very nicely. And it's sort of a form of massage and a form of tenderness that way. The men, no touchy, nothing like that. There are lots and lots of very strong cultural prescriptions against this stuff there. So
what's their view of the Americans?
The question was, what's the view of the Americans there? Well, we were there during the Gulf War, the first one, the 91 stuff going on. And most Westerners left the Sudan. The Sudan then was regarded as sort of a rogue state, and most Westerners left. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum, they flew everybody out, and the ambassador locked the door and tossed the keys to the Greek gardener and said, we'll be back when we're back, keep an eye on things, and they all split. And so for a short period during the Gulf War, June and Taya and I were Taya was Canadian, which ended up actually being really cool because the British Embassy was still open, and the British Embassy ended up taking responsibility for the Canadians and then later for us because everybody else was gone. We were the last 3 Westerners in our part of the world for a while. And when we'd go back and forth to Khartoum or to Gaddarf, the local Sheikh guy decided that he was going to have an armed guard with us because he was worried about some rabble-rousers trying to hurt us or do something. So we go ripping around in the back of the Toyota pickup truck with a couple of guys with machine guns for a while, and it was all sort of weird. And
Was it very scary for you?
No, I was mostly just disappointed. I actually wasn't scared because the people in our village were very cool, and you know, we were pretty esteemed in our village. I didn't have any problem with that, but it's sort of disconcerting to realize that your ambassador just left and like there's nobody to watch you anymore if you get into trouble. So that was sort of a drag.
Well, how'd you get home? Did you make...
Well, they sent a new ambassador, first of all, and she was really cool. You know, Sudan has Sharia. Do you guys know what Sharia is, the law? The word in Arabic means the road or the path, and it's a very strict interpretation of law that includes no alcohol. Under Sharia law, you can't drink. Well, I happen to love I enjoy alcohol. This is even on tape. I got to be careful here. I enjoy, and it's 118 freaking degrees, you know, and so an ice cold beer in that is like really cool. So the new ambassador, when she arrived, the first thing that she did was to come out and sort of hit all the places where Westerners were still working, and she'd bring out this great big cooler with watermelon and beer iced down and all this stuff, and so she just totally endeared herself to us. We were so cool. So she ended up sort of helping everybody exit when the time came, but that was pretty cool. Yes, ma'am?
Were there any issues with you treating women there?
The question was, what about issues treating women? Yes, that's actually a great question. Everything always was accompanied with a chaperone, sometimes 2 or 3. And Taya and June often had to do this stuff sort of unaccompanied. They're the 2 registered nurses, and there were a great number of deliveries and gynae issues and stuff that ended up were just sort of decided between them, where the men were excluded from the decision making and from the treatment stuff, which is also fine. Many of the women in the part of the Sinai where we worked are circumcised. And this created some problems because after delivery, there's also, I believe the word is infundibulation, where the labia are sewn together. And one of the ways that they ensure that, you know, nobody is snuggling down with the women except for their husband is the labia is sewn together. And sometimes the hood of the clitoris and part of the tissue around there is removed. And it becomes a cultural thing that is, again, sort of women's turf. And we got into a lot of ethical discussions and a lot of problems about what to do when these homemade surgeries became infected or when there were problems. Or many of these women had bladder infections because the tissue over the urethra was sewn shut. And so there was all kinds of stuff going on with that. And to try and decide what to do to deal with that. And sort of at the end of the journey, after much agonizing, we said we're not going to get involved with it for or against one way or the other, just to sort of back out of that, which I still don't know whether or not that was the right thing to do or a cowardly thing to do. But again, that wasn't really, nobody asked us, and so I don't know. There was a hand raised over here. Did somebody have a hand raised? No.
I have a question about your AIDS patients.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you do for them? How do you treat them?
I'm caring for about 120 people now who are living with HIV, and when folks discover this, the first thing we do is assess their immune status. And the 2 tests that are first most important are a T cell count or a CD4 count and a viral load. There's a subset of white blood cells that's responsible for our defenses. That's sort of our soldiers on the fortress wall. And they're marching the wall, you know, day and night, making sure no invaders jump into the fortress. And those cells are called the CD4 or T cells. And when you have a lot of those, 1,000 per cc of blood, for example, very few invaders are going to get into your fort. You know, it's easy to keep the invaders out. And when the numbers start dropping off, 500, 400, 300, 200, all of a sudden you've got lots of exposed fortress and things start, you know, invading. And so, you know, up into jumps TB, and up comes pneumocystis, and then comes Kaposi's, and then comes, you know, mycobacterium. There's just one thing after another. And so what we try and do is assess how many of those T cells are around for starters. And there are allopathic medicines now that can sort of keep the virus from replicating and allow those T cells to grow and replicate again and come back. And so when people reach a certain level of immunodeficiency, the T cells are, for example, 200 to 300, we ask them to start taking medication or consider it. And the medicines stop the virus. The HIV virus gets inside these T cells and holds them hostage and takes them over and blows them up. And these medicines stop the virus from either gaining access to the cell or from causing any threat to these cells, and the T cells get to grow again. That's in a nutshell sort of what HIV treatment is from an allopathic point of view. There's a pretty good body of literature now about complementary therapy, though, in HIV, and the use of antioxidant vitamins and, you know, sort of the whole contemplative Zen peace in all of this that certainly plays a role. And so it's a great time to be doing this. There's a lot of optimism, and in general, we're able to do very well by people.
So you have some ongoing research with what you're treating right now.
Yeah, we enroll them in studies. Most of the studies are through UNMC, and we do some study enrolling. And I call colleagues back in California. You get tips all the time too. There's a wonderful doctor that I work with a lot. Her name is Lisa Capaldini, and she guides me. And she gets a big kick out of it that I call from Omaha, because for some reason, people from the coast, when you say you're from Omaha, they tend to giggle. What is that all about? People tend to laugh. You're calling from Omaha? Yeah, I don't know. I think the Chamber of Commerce missed the whole thing, because they should have done something to sort of, you know, accentuate that people tend to find this sort of ludicrous that somebody calls from Omaha. I don't know what that's all about. I personally refer to it as the Paris of the Pig Belt, and so when everybody says, you know, I'm a guest in town, welcome to the Paris of the Pig Belt. So, yes, ma'am.
I know that you're very good friends with Paulette, and you know Paulette very well. I'm sure that you recommend massage to your patients. I just wondered, do you have very many that do that?
Yeah, I do. I have a fair number of patients who take it on, and I am the very, very happy beneficiary of massage myself now every single month from one of your school grads. And so that's very fun. He's doing a great job by me. And I will give him at least some of the credit for me being somewhat healthier than I used to be. I'm trying to find some balance in this. And I mean, Paulette knows me well enough now. I get really wound up and I have a lot of stressy stuff, and I'm a do-gooder and I want everybody to be happy. And sometimes this stuff all colludes to create a great big mess where nobody's happy and I'm stressed out and I'm not sleeping. And what I do is get cold sores. If I get stressed out, I get cold sores and I can't sleep, and, you know, tend to drink more, which is, I can't believe I'm saying this on camera. All my filters are gone. And John has been one of the parts that said, you know, you need to make this a priority. We're going to set aside an hour and a half at least once a month, and more if you need it, where the beeper goes off, the cell phone goes off, nobody can get a hold of you. You are right here and now, and this is where you're supposed to be, and nobody else can get to you, and everybody's going to be okay. You don't need to just let all this stuff go away, you know. And then he starts with the whole thing about, you know, plant your feet in this. Yeah, and just sort of walks me through this thing, and I end up falling asleep through at least half of it, maybe more. You know, which is just joyful, and you wake up sort of stoned and weird, and you know. So, yeah, it is. It's wonderful. I mean, and especially for people that tend to towards the anxiety, insomnia, tense stuff. In my experience, that's who benefits the most from this. And if there was assistance in payment and proper reimbursement for the people who perform massage, there would be a whole lot more of this. You know, have people who will, and again, it's just our own flawed priorities sometimes, you know, that'll spend a whole lot of money on stupid stuff, and then you come to them and say, okay, we need 65 or 75 or 45 or 25 or whatever dollars to pay somebody for their talents for a good massage, and oh, that's too much money. I can't afford that. And I'm like, oh. So anyway, but it's ongoing. I think that you guys are doing this at a great time, and because the world is recognizing this is one of the things we can do for comfort and care, and it matters a lot. And people are often very, very independent and aren't touched and aren't treated with tenderness. You know, to my mind, the world is getting ruder all the time. You know, this is a really, really rushed, rude world sometimes. This town, which used to be, you know, when you're behind the wheel, take your time. It doesn't matter because you're going to get there in 15 minutes. There's nowhere to go. You know, it's just take your time. It isn't like that anymore. You know, it's cut in front. I'm going to get ahead of you at the light and honk and, you know, and a lot of this stuff is car stuff, but even just regular human interaction stuff, I don't think we're so good at connecting with one another. And massage is, again, one of the ways where people can feel some tenderness and touch and get connected again. And, you know, so it has benefits beyond the individual, I think. We all benefit. So I hope that you guys find that too in your practice and your body of work. Other stuff? Ma'am?
With HIV and AIDS being such a global problem, and you being in the medical field and that being something you're interested in, do you see like more privileged countries like us doing more to help, you know, continents like Africa, stuff like that?
The question raised was, will it, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, is it likely that we're going to be able to do more in other places of the world? Certainly so. You know, I think the political decision makers are driving this, that there will be medication access and there will be medical care access and knowledge to more and more people. I wonder if it's going to get there in time. I mean, there are communities, Zimbabwe and Zambia and Botswana and parts of South Africa that are in negative population growth. This is the first time this has happened in nations since the plague in the 1500s, where nations are shrinking. I mean, it has never happened before in modern times. And the very agent that causes life, the act of intercourse, you know, where we all start, also is transmitting death. Think about that. I mean, just phenomenal that the agent of life is transmitting death in these communities. And, you know, where is this going to land? I don't know. We're waking up really late in the game. You know, less so here. It's sort of a different illness and a different scenario here. Although my last dozen new patients, probably 7 of them are women who were transmitted by their partners. So this is changing too. This isn't just a gay guy's thing. And I'm not going to get into the whole, you know, harpy political part of all that, but it's starting to look a little more like it looks in other places in the world. And so we'll see. I hope that there's time, and I think that there's scientific will, and I look forward to more political will, you know. I actually think if you get enough smart people together and enough, you know, political will, that we actually probably will figure this out, that there will be answers in time. Mother Nature is a way of sort of dealing with this too. You know, all illnesses, when they first appear, infectious illnesses tend to have really high lethality early in the game. A new bug appears. A great example of smallpox with Native Americans. You know, this is Lewis and Clark time. Everybody's celebrating this. Okay, Lewis and Clark swooped through in the Native Americans for the first time, and probably, you know, they or their forebears or afterbears brought smallpox for the first time also to the Oto and Missouri and Omaha people. And the first wave of this stuff just knocked them out, from Chief Blackbird to everybody. They just were nailed by this because they'd never seen it before. They had no innate immunity to smallpox, and so the mortality was huge. And within a generation or two, the Native American immunity is brought up, and it no longer has the same lethality. And I suspect the same thing may happen with HIV in these times, that the first wave is just incredibly high mortality. And as time goes by, there are certain people who are going to demonstrate some resistance to this, and it isn't going to get them. And there's where the answers are going to lie. And I think people will sort of grow in strength, and it'll eventually sort of poop out a little bit. So we'll see. It's a great chance for us as a nation of people to respond as gentle benefactor, helpful, kind people, and sort of redress what the world thinks of us. Or we can turn into stick-in-the-mud, creepy, scary, hard-nosed people. And I hope that the world recognizes that there are lots and lots of good folks here. I believe you asked, what did the Sudanese people think of me individually? You know, they're they have people with more hospitality than anywhere on earth. They're just phenomenal. And part of it is desert survival. If you meet somebody in the desert, you have to feed them and take care of them, because sooner or later it's going to come back around for you. It's sort of a karma principle. You know, put it out there and it'll come back around. You never shut a door in anybody's face for fear that before long you're the one that's going to need help. And so they're just phenomenally hospitable people, you know, sort of one-on-one. Politics and government gets in the way. Other stuff?
What fun thing did you do?
I'm sorry, ma'am?
What fun thing did you do while you were there?
What fun thing did I do? I don't know. Having beer when it was against Sharia was a very fun thing. And delivering this baby was a wonderfully fun thing. And we had Bonnie Raitt CDs, and we'd sit at night underneath the little thatched roof and listen to our Bonnie Raitt. And we had prom one night where we all made, we made suits, and the girls made prom dresses out of mosquito netting. And we had prom, and we had... Christmas Eve was very cool because the Southern Sudanese guys came and danced for us on Christmas Eve. The Dinka Nuer, which are most of our tribespeople in Omaha now, you know, these, you know, 6'7" and 7 foot, you know, skinny guys, and they had this phenomenal dance, and they came and danced for us, and we had a little Christmas tree, and you know, we had a wild turkey whose name was Bob, and we ate Bob for Christmas, you know. This is the other thing. This is a good lesson for everybody about eating and the whole issue of food. You know, in a place like the Sudan, if you want chicken, it actually starts with baka baka bak. You know, it has to, that's where, you know, this stuff always starts, and it's also a nice connection thing that I think we would actually all benefit from, at least at intervals. You know, you're hungry for potatoes, here's the fork, go dig them and get started. And that's not a bad thing for everybody to sort of realize. Yeah, it's very much what we did on the farm. I talked to my mom about this, and you know, she lives in Phoenix now, and I don't think she will ever come back. And part of the reason why is because she just hated all of that, you know. If I wanted potatoes, that meant I either had to go into the root cellar to get them, which was really creepy because there's spiders and stuff in there, or go out to the garden and dig them, and that was really creepy because it was muddy and it was hard work, and I hated both, so I don't think she'll ever come back again. But it's not a bad thing to learn. Sir?
Did I hear you right? You said watermelon beer?
Watermelon and beer. She brought watermelon and beer. Yeah, yeah. She brought watermelon and beer. Yeah.
How old were you?
Oh, this is now 12, 14 years ago. So 30, 31, 32 in there. Yeah, it was cool.
So are there still a lot of opportunities for physicians to go around the world and treat?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots and lots of places in the world that are looking for help. But again, I'm learning not to have a whole lot of hubris about this, because again, I don't think we give near as much as we get from an experience like that. So at least that's what I've sort of come to realize. I traveled for a while afterwards. After I left Khartoum, I went to Nairobi, and then ended up riding in the back of a pickup truck into Tanzania and climbed Kilimanjaro, and then took the train to Dar es Salaam and went on a boat to Zanzibar. And I can't tell you all the things I did on Zanzibar because this is on tape. So we had a lot of fun there. I went to Kampala and rode around in Uganda on the back of a pickup truck, and went to Egypt, and went to Jordan and Petra, you know, where the Indiana Jones stuff was all filmed, and crossed the Allenby Bridge into Jerusalem, and then went to Bahrain for a while, and you know, and farted around all over there until my money ran out. And it was a wonderful time because the whole time I had one little bitty gym sack, and I had a couple pairs of clothes and a couple of paperbacks and a shaving kit and a camera, and that's it. And for 2 years, you live out of a little gym sack, and it's sort of an interesting notion to think about that. And when something wears out, you leave it along the way and find something new. And there's sort of this barter system between travelers and stuff too. When you finish a paperback, you're hanging out with somebody and, you know, trading your stuff off, and you know, it was a nice thing to do. It's a good time. And now with all my stuff, I have a lot of stuff now. It's sort of an interesting notion to be able to think about walking away from all that again. It gets harder though when you get more stuff. If you get a lot of stuff, it's a little harder. But it's still sometimes tempting. I go through these great frenzied swirls of getting rid of things.
This stuff kind of holds us back sometimes.
Yes, indeed. I call it my monastic periods, and I have to get rid of everything, and everything must go, and it drives my partner crazy because, you know, closets will be empty and things will be gone and everything will go. And for those of you who are in relationships, it's probably wise to communicate with your loved one sort of what you're up to before you start this stuff. I really appreciate it. You guys are very cool, and good luck with what you're up to, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.